Welcome, you curious mind. We're doing a deep dive today into a really fascinating world. It's where stories aren't just, told passively. They're actively built, shaped by the very systems we use to create them. We're talking modern mythology. It's this concept that helps us understand how our narratives define us,
Yeah.
yeah, influence us, and even let us step into completely new worlds. So today we're unpacking a whole bunch of sources. We've got this intriguing welcome from Modern Mythology Comic Art, and then the really extensive Explore Modern Mythology resources. Our mission really is to pull out the most compelling ideas about how writing and role-playing games connect, how they co-evolve, and how these collaborative experiences are forging, well, what you might call modern myths.
Exactly. Yeah, this deep dive is uh it's for anyone who really appreciates the power of a good story. Doesn't matter if you're a seasoned storyteller, a game designer, maybe, or just really curious about how stories work in our lives. We'll dig into that push and pull,
Uh-huh.
between the story itself and the systems behind it. It's kind of a shortcut to understanding just how big an impact shared storytelling has and the immersive worlds it creates. Get ready for some real aha moments, I think.
Okay, so let's start there. Modern mythology. When we talk about that term, what do these sources actually point to? They really seem to emphasize this intersection, right? Stories and systems influencing each other. And what's really interesting is how it applies so directly to role-playing games, RPGs.
Yeah, absolutely. What's fascinating is how RPGs are presented as like the quintessential space for this, for shared storytelling, creating immersive worlds. They're basically modern myths in the making. And the key idea, I think, is that push and pull between the narrative, the story part, and the game mechanics. It allows for this unique coevolution. Writing and the game experience, they grow together. And it deepens how we appreciate both, really. It's about seeing that storytelling isn't just one person talking. It's a deeply collaborative thing that builds characters and shared realities right there in real time.
That collaboration piece feels central, like the engine driving it. The Modern Mythology podcast itself, one of our sources, talks directly about how collaboration teaches us character building. How exactly do they explore that?
Well, they use a mix. They have conversations, but also these one-shot actual play episodes.
Yep.
And the key takeaway, I'd say, is how they explore the tools we use, whether it's like explicit rule books or just the unspoken social rules at the table. These tools fundamentally shape the stories we end up telling. For instance, they recently started a sci-fi arc. They just wrapped up a deep dive into horror RPGs.
Yeah.
And they even looked at story structure, like the basic three-act model. So it's not just talk. They're actually showing how playing together creates the narrative.
Ah, okay. So it's not just what story you tell, but how you tell it, especially with others involved. That makes a lot of sense. So the podcast gives us that big picture, maybe the practice side. But the Modern Mythology Initiative also has this articles section, a blog, right? Dedicated to resources for storytelling, RPGs, covers mechanics, narrative theory, all sorts of stuff. What were some of the real standouts you found there? Any specific examples?
Oh, definitely. One article, Rules in Practice Part 1, was particularly insightful. Its main point is that game rules aren't these rigid blueprints. They're dynamic. They get renegotiated by players, by the group's culture. It really shows how the system itself kind of becomes a living character in the story. It asks, why do the rules as written often change at the table? How can mismatched ideas about the rules disrupt a game? And what are designers actually trying to do when they write rules about, say, who controls the narrative, or risk, or reward?
That's a really great point about rules evolving. I remember this one D&D session where our DM interpreted a rule in a way none of us expected. It led to this completely unplanned but totally epic side quest. It really nails that idea, the system being alive in the story.
Yeah. And speaking of narrative power, there's another article you mentioned, A Long Road Out of Hell. It looks at the horror film Jacob's Ladder. Makes you wonder what actually makes something truly horrifying. Right. And this article argues that Jacob's Ladder is so horrifying because, and this is a quote, you never know how solid the ground beneath you is.
Hmm.
It's not about, say, explicit gore like in Hellraiser or things you don't see like in Psycho. It's about this pervasive narrative uncertainty.
Ah,
That's the real insight, I think.
huh.
Making the audience or the player question reality itself.
Yeah.
That can be way more powerful, more impactful than just showing a monster.
Wow. Yeah. So it's less about what's literally there, more about what's happening in your own head. That's powerful.
Right.
And finally, there was the Modern Mythology Foundation's article. That seemed to touch on something really basic, like why do we even care about stories in the first place?
Exactly. This piece gets into that deep human need we have for stories and images. Big
Oh.
epic ones, small everyday ones,
Hmm.
things that help us relate to ourselves and the world around us. And it directly pushes back on the idea that myths are somehow childish or something we grow out of.
Yep.
It really emphasizes how relevant and frankly critical they still are in our lives.
Yeah.
It's like we're just wired to make meaning through stories. We can't help it.
Absolutely. Hardwired for narrative, it feels like. Okay, so expanding out from the blog, their wider podcast network has a couple more interesting projects. First, the Fallen Cycle Mythos Fiction podcast. What's the unique angle there for modern myth making?
The Fallen Cycle, yeah, it's this big transmedia thing created by James Curcio and collaborators. The premise is basically forgotten, forgetful gods walking among us. Kind of intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating because it's not just one thing. It spans illustrated novels, comics, audio fiction, and RPGs.
Mm.
Now, you can apparently jump into the different parts in any order. But the podcast itself, they say it's best listened to sequentially, to really get the whole story arc. It's a really ambitious way to build a whole mythos across different media.
That is ambitious. Wow. Okay, and then the other one mentioned is the Narrative Machines Theory podcast. That sounds like it gets really deep into how narratives actually work in the world. What's the sort of profound takeaway from that one?
It really does dive deep. It draws on like over a decade of research across different fields, looking at memetics, myth, propaganda.
Hmm.
And the profound takeaway, I think it's how our identities, our political views even, are being quietly shaped, sculpted by the stories we consume every day, often without us even realizing it.
Mm.
It looks at how ideas spread online, shaping how we see things, shaping social norms. It kind of forces you to think about how, any period in history might end up being seen as myth, just as it was defined by its own myths while it was happening.
Okay, so wrapping this up a bit, what does all this mean for you listening in? We've journeyed through this really complex landscape, haven't we? Modern mythology. From collaborative storytelling and RPGs, all the way to these hidden ways narratives shape who we are, how we see things. We've seen how stories and systems aren't really separate. They're constantly interacting, influencing each other, creating the very fabric of, well, how we understand things.
Yeah, exactly. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it's pretty clear. The myths of today, they
Mhm.
aren't just dusty old tales. They're active, they're evolving narratives
Mm.
being built right now, often through shared experiences, digital platforms. Understanding these dynamics, it gives you a really powerful lens, doesn't it? To look at the information, the entertainment you encounter every single day. You start seeing the narrative threads kind of connecting everything.
So here's a final, maybe provocative thought for you to chew on. Given everything we've explored today, think about the platforms you use every day, social media feeds, online game communities, whatever. Consider how their subtle rules, their structures. How might they be shaping the stories you consume? And the ones you create or share. Are you just passively reading along, or are you actually an active participant, a myth maker in this huge unfolding narrative? Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an eye on how those hidden tools are shaping the stories you tell, and maybe even the ones you live.